What's up everyone, welcome to today's video. Welcome to the Video Game Fight School channel. Thank you very much for tuning in. So before I jump into this video, I wanted to go ahead and say a big thank you to everyone who has discovered the channel and has been engaging. We're now over 4,000 subscribers in just less than a week. I think something just happened and a lot of people started engaging. So I just wanted to thank everyone, both the old school community that have been here since 2019 and those of you that are just, basically finding the work that I do here just more recently. Today I wanted to go ahead and talk about something that I felt was at first a pet peeve, then eventually as I started to just think a little bit more on it, it just appeared apparent to me that I think we might have a little issue here on our hand. Now, in my commentary for this video, I might seem a little harsh with some of the DC properties and Gotham Knights and all, but I think you must take it into context before you can evaluate how I envision Gotham Knights. I think the game, in my opinion, is an effort of some kind to have followed a trend from 2017. I am looking forward to it nonetheless, but I think right now my suspicions have been much more solidified. So initially, this entire thing started out when we saw the recent gameplay reveal, and while the developers were showcasing this and talking about this, as the knights were fighting and taking down enemies, somehow materials and collectible items began to appear on the floor. Now, I'm sure many people saw this and said, this is a little weird for a game to kind of want to distance itself from Marvel's Avengers, but yet you're seeing these things on the floor that you have to pick up that you can use for maybe crafting or some other things down the road. Now, inherently, this is not necessarily a bad thing if you were to kind of look at it with an objective lens, but like I said, it started out as that being a really interesting pet peeve. I didn't talk about it in any of my other videos, and I've made about a dozen videos since we saw that reveal, but I decided that before I would mention it, I wanted to go back and kind of consider very carefully why this system is actually a thing. Well, I guess with my confirmation of my suspicions, I think that it appeared to me that Warner Brothers Games wanted to move a certain direction with their games, and I don't necessarily know how well that's gonna pan out. You see, even as we're speaking right now, the closed alpha for the video game Multiversus is actually in the works. Now, this is a brawler that's more like Smash, and it has a lot of DC heroes or Warner Brothers properties characters in it. And I look at the trend of the three major games right now that are going to be coming out in the next few months in regard to their affiliation with Warner Brothers, and every single one of them has a multiplayer element of some kind. Now, this is really interesting because Warner Brothers games would usually have the single player element as their core focus for most of their games compared to, say, the other games. Now, if you look at, say, fighting games, NetherRealm Studios is a studio that has developed Mortal Kombat and Injustice. These games have a multiplayer component, being fighting games and also having a competitive aspect. But just more recently, it appears to me, Gotham Knights, which is supposed to be from a studio that has in the past made a single player game, they're now making this game with a cooperative aspect to it, a game that's supposed to allow for replayability all the way down the road. And then you see Multiversus, which is a brawler that also has that element to it. I'm not necessarily going to judge that one harshly because a component of it really hinges upon having this multiplayer element, and then Suicide Squad. Now, inherently, it appears to me that there is a shift in the paradigm. This is not to say that the shift one way or the other is good or bad. I don't think that's really what my video is here to actually talk about, but I think that there might be a problem because this shift seems to scale heavily in the way of the much more multiplayer aspects. Because I have to keep in mind as well that the Wonder Woman game that we just saw revealed more than likely is going to be a single player game. So if you look at the ratio right now, there is a higher propensity of these multiplayer IPs or products compared to the single player ones. And I think this focus is not necessarily the smartest trend to go. Why I say that is because if you look at, say, one of the biggest winners in terms of single player IPs, which is Sony, you'll notice that they seem to be having a lot more successes than failures with their single player products that they actually put out. So if we go back and even look at the most controversial of all of them, which was The Last of Us Part 2, that even in its own right did well in sales, even though it was very controversial in its story. And then you look at at some other beloved and much more anticipated ones, like Horizon Forbidden West, judge it however you want, it seemed to have done well, even though it was released on the tails of Elden Ring, which basically squashed it into the ground with all the hype. I mean, it's not necessarily that one was a bad game and the other was better, it just happened to be one was very much more popular. Then you look at games like God of War and look at Ragnarok, which everyone I have basically spoken to is looking forward to, and then you look at some games that probably didn't even do well, like Days Gone, but then you also have to weigh that against games like Spider-Man and games like Ratchet and Clank and Returnal and Demon Souls, and you start to see that Sony has proven success in the single player games. So Warner Brothers moving a lot more of their IPs, or Warner Brothers Interactive Entertainment moving forward with this trend, might be something that eventually comes back to hurt them in a sense. Now, I understand the propensity for a lot of these businesses to look and say, yeah, let's just do more of this multiplayer stuff. And if you have a big corporation that can make both multiplayer and single player games, there's nothing once in a while wrong with making a few multiplayer IPs. But if you're a studio, or if you have studios that have the experience and have the very proven success of having made these single player games, then it makes very little sense for that kind of a huge pivot at the same time. If we even want to say, well, Sony seems like an outlier, we can bring another example in EA. EA for the longest time has always been looking for the next monetizable content. It appeared to me for some reason that a lot of the executives in EA, once they found out that FIFA was the golden goose, they almost could not sleep until they replicated that success with another IP. In fact, I'm sure it was so intoxicating that somehow, somewhere, somebody thought it smart that aspect of video games to a Star Wars game. Well, it didn't necessarily work. And on the other hand, the same EA published another single player Star Wars game, Star Wars Jedi Fallen Order, which actually became a success, which leaned very heavily to telling them that, hey, these single player games have a very huge audience and people are willing to engage in these games, and they have a very high chance of success. Now, let's look at an economic perspective of this, because I don't want to sound ignorant saying, oh, make single player games, you only got to make, no, I don't want to do that. I want to also talk about the side that as an investment piece, whenever a video game publisher or whatever is trying to make a video game, they at the same time are in a sense wanting to be risk averse, and single player games are actually kind of risky. You see, for a single player game, because of the way it's built, you really have to do a lot of work, and that takes a lot of time in development, storytelling, mocap, logistics, and all of the above, and it risks failure. Like Days Gone. Days Gone basically did not hit some of the marks that Sony wanted to see, and a sequel did not necessarily make it into the approval stage. Even though the core fans of that franchise enjoyed the game, it appeared that Sony did not necessarily want to deal with that. Now look at, say, a game like Ghost of Tsushima. That game did so well, it basically raked in a whole bunch of sales. It built a new fan base, or a fan base that was already existing with Sucker Punch and their old games, and I'm certain that if at any point we hear of a second or a sequel to Ghost of Tsushima, it's not necessarily going to be a surprise. So there are risks and there are high rewards, and I think as Sony is using this risk and reward balance, other huge publishers should be able to take on this without any problems. Where they're going to make a lot of huge mistakes is if they tilt themselves way too far, thereby betting heavily on this multiplayer thing. I think that's really going to come in and bite them very hard, because the truth is, right now the market is actually oversaturated. There used to be a time that the multiplayer games were the outliers and people played those and enjoyed those variation of games, but now it seems the market is tilting towards a higher demand for single player games. So for just that little pet peeve part of this video, I'm hoping that Warner Brothers Games Montreal can remove those little pickup elements, and how huge and pronounced they are really off-putting for a select audience. And that is the audience that's coming to Gotham Knights with a mindset that they'll be able to enjoy some single player elements of the game. At any rate, they can probably maybe hide the mechanic or make it less pronounced, or make it, something that's not necessarily a huge visual cue to detract from the possible immersive experience that you could get from just free flow running around, or just the free flow of a mission. I mean, it's kind of weird if you punch a guy over there and then you jump and punch another guy, you look around and see that that guy dropped you like some material, and instead of just moving on to the next thing you wanted to do, you probably have to go on and maybe walk over that material to pick it up. Or maybe you're playing Nightwing and then the other person's playing Robin, and Robin gets some material and you see it and you're like, oh, Robin, did you get a material? That doesn't really sound good for this kind of game anyways. But again, like I said, that's a pet peeve. But my major concerns I've already expressed, in the sense that the industry right now doesn't seem favorable for these kinds of games, and it will make a lot of sense if these publishers are able to kind of set their focus on what the market seems to be wanting more of, because oversaturation of a lot of these multiplayer aspects seem to not necessarily work with a lot more solid IPs. But that's pretty much my thoughts for this particular topic. I'd love to hear your thoughts in the comment section. Thank you very much for watching the video. I appreciate you guys so much. Hopefully we'll talk soon. Peace out.